The holographic display flickered to life in the center of the United Nations Assembly Hall and cast an eerie blue glow across the faces of Earth's assembled leaders. Ambassador Kyle Morrison stood rigid at the podium with his hands gripping the edges as the Alien Council delivered their verdict. The silence in the massive room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every eye was fixed on the shimmering image before them. Counselor Vexithera appeared in the center of the display, and her towering, crystalline body refracted light in 1,000 different directions. Her voice resonated through the translation matrix with a cold and mechanical precision that made Kyle's skin crawl. She began speaking in a tone that left no room for argument or appeal. The Galactic Council has reviewed Earth's application for membership, and after extensive deliberation spanning 3 of your Earth years, we have reached a unanimous decision. Your species has been deemed too aggressive and too volatile and too unpredictable for admission at this time. Your historical records show a pattern of internal conflict that spans your entire recorded history. Your military expenditures remain excessive despite 3 decades of peaceful contact with galactic civilization. Your planet harbors over 200 distinct governmental entities, and many of them exist in states of political or economic conflict with one another. Kyle felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. He had expected rejection, but hearing it spoken aloud with such finality struck harder than he had anticipated. Behind him, he could hear the sharp intake of breath from President Helen Grant and the angry muttering that rippled through the assembly like a wave. Furthermore, Vexthera continued, and her crystalline face seemed to pulse with amber light. Your entertainment and cultural products glorify violence and conquest. Your literature celebrates warfare, and your visual media depicts destruction on massive scales. This suggests a psychological predisposition toward aggressive expansion that the Council cannot overlook. The decision is final and cannot be appealed for a minimum of 50 Earth years. We wish your species well in your continued development. Kyle stepped forward and raised one hand. With respect, Counselor, we have met every technical requirement laid out in the membership guidelines. Our technology is compatible with galactic standards. Our diplomatic corps has been trained in proper protocols. We have demonstrated peaceful intentions for 3 full decades since first contact. We have not initiated a single act of aggression against any galactic species. Your compliance with technical requirements is noted, Vexithara replied, but it is insufficient. The Council must consider not merely your current behavior, but your potential for future disruption. Your species evolved too rapidly and achieved technological advancement at a pace that concerns many Council members. You progressed from primitive combustion engines to faster-than-light travel in less than 2 centuries. This rate of change suggests instability. Kyle felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice steady and professional. With respect, Counselor, that rapid advancement is a strength and not a weakness. It demonstrates adaptability and innovation and a capacity for growth. It demonstrates unpredictability, Ambassador Morrison. The Council values stability above all else. Your application is denied. The hologram flickered once more and then dissolved into nothing and left the assembly in shocked silence. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The weight of rejection hung heavy in the air like a physical presence. Then President Helen Grant stood slowly from her seat in the front row. Her face was calm, but Kyle could see the fury burning in her eyes. She smoothed her jacket with deliberate care and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. Ambassador Morrison, I would like to see you in my office immediately. General Claire Hudson and Dr. Paul Martinez, please join us. 20 minutes later, the 4 of them sat around the polished mahogany table in the presidential suite. The room was decorated with flags from every nation on Earth and served as a reminder of how far humanity had come in uniting under a single banner for galactic matters. Helen sat at the head of the table with her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the wood. Kyle loosened his tie and tried to process what had just happened. General Hudson sat with her arms crossed and her military bearing evident in every line of her posture. Dr. Martinez had his tablet out and was already scrolling through data. They're afraid of us, Paul said finally, and broke the silence. His voice was quiet but certain. I've been studying the psychological profiles we've gathered on Council species over the past 30 years. The pattern is clear. They see humanity as a threat. Can you blame them? Claire replied with a slight edge to her voice. We went from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear weapons in less than a century. We went from the first airplane to Mars colonies in another century. We evolve and adapt faster than any species they've ever encountered. Of course they're afraid. Helen stopped drumming her fingers and looked at each of them in turn. So what are our options? She wasn't asking a question so much as demanding solutions. Kyle leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment before responding. We could petition again in 50 years. We could reform our image and make changes to appease their concerns. We could demilitarize further even though we're already at historical lows for military spending. We could essentially become what they want us to be instead of what we are. Or Helen prompted, and there was something sharp in her tone. Claire leaned forward with her elbows on the table. Or we stop asking for permission to join their club. We stop trying to fit into their system. We start building our own. Paul looked up sharply from his tablet. You're suggesting we form an alternative alliance. An independent organization outside council authority. Why not, Claire said, and a slight smile crossed her face. We've made contact with 17 species in the past 30 years. Not all of them are council members. Some were rejected just like us. Others never bothered to apply. What if we reached out to them? What if we offered them something different? Helen's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she considered the implications. An independent coalition, outside the council's framework entirely. No more begging for acceptance. No more trying to meet their arbitrary standards. It would be seen as provocative, Kyle warned. The council might interpret it as a hostile act. They could impose sanctions or worse, let them, Claire said flatly. They already rejected us. They already made it clear we're not welcome in their club. So we'll make our own club with our own rules. We'll reach out to other rejected species and offer them partnership instead of hierarchy. We'll build something that actually reflects our values instead of theirs. Helen sat back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was a new determination in her gaze. The council made their choice. They looked at humanity and decided we weren't good enough for them. They decided our diversity was a weakness. They decided our rapid advancement was dangerous. They decided our military preparedness made us warmongers even though we haven't started a war in decades. She stood and walked to the window that overlooked the city below. The sun was setting and cast long shadows across the buildings. So we'll show them they were wrong. We'll show them that the very things they fear about us are actually our greatest strengths. We'll build an alliance based on mutual respect instead of rigid conformity. We'll prove that there's more than one way to achieve peace and prosperity in this galaxy. Kyle felt a spark of excitement cutting through his disappointment. It would be an enormous undertaking. We'd need to identify potential partners and reach out diplomatically and establish framework agreements. We'd need to create new institutions from scratch. Then we better get started, Paul said with a grin. I can have a list of potential partner species ready by tomorrow morning. Species that were rejected or marginalized or never applied. Species that might welcome an alternative to council membership. I'll start working on military and security frameworks, Claire added. If we're going to do this, we need to ensure we can defend ourselves and our partners. The council won't like competition. Helen turned back to face them. This is a historic decision. We're not just responding to rejection. We're fundamentally changing humanity's approach to galactic relations. We're choosing to lead instead of follow. Are we all in agreement? Kyle looked at the others and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. The council had meant to put humanity in its place. Instead, they had lit a fire. Yes, Madam President, we're in agreement. Then let's get to work, Helen said. We have a coalition to build. 6 months had passed since the council's rejection and the diplomatic vessel Unity's Hope emerged from faster-than-light travel near the Kepler system. Captain Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge watching the view screen as a rust-colored planet rotated slowly before them. The planet's surface was covered in deep canyons and red sand deserts that reminded her of images she had seen of Mars before the terraforming began. Navigation Officer Greg Owens checked his instruments and looked up with a nod. Approaching Theric Prime Captain, we're receiving a hailing signal on the diplomatic frequency. Lisa straightened her uniform and took a deep breath. This was humanity's first official contact with a potential coalition partner, and everything depended on making a good impression. Open the channel, Greg. The view screen shifted and displayed a reptilian figure, seated in what appeared to be a command center. His scales were a deep bronze color, and his golden eyes gleamed with sharp intelligence. Commander. Jakara of the Theric Sovereignty inclined his head in a gesture that the translation software indicated was a formal greeting. Captain Monroe, his voice came through the translator with a slight hissing quality. We received your government's transmission regarding a proposed alliance. I confess my people were surprised by your proposal. Lisa offered a warm smile and clasped her hands behind her back in a relaxed but professional posture. Commander Zakara, it's an honor to meet you. I understand the surprise. Our proposal is unconventional, but we believe the current galactic system has failed many worthy species, including both of ours. A rasping sound emerged from Zakara's throat, and the translation matrix identified it as laughter. A human expression comes to mind, Captain. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We prefer to think of it differently, Lisa replied. Those who stand alone together are never truly alone. Zakara's head tilted slightly and his eyes studied her with renewed interest. Philosophical. I appreciate that. The council deemed the Theric too territorial. They said we lacked sufficient social cohesion because we organize ourselves in clan structures rather than unified planetary governments. They wanted us to abandon thousands of years of culture and tradition just to fit their arbitrary standards. Lisa nodded sympathetically. They told us we were too aggressive. Apparently, maintaining a strong defensive military means we're warmongers, regardless of the fact that Earth hasn't started an interstellar conflict since achieving faster-than-light travel. They judged us by our past rather than our present. Then we understand each other, Commander Zakara said, and leaned forward in his seat. What exactly is Earth proposing, Captain Monroe? Lisa gestured, and a holographic display appeared between them showing a proposed framework. A mutual defense and cooperation pact, free exchange of technology and cultural information, joint research initiatives in fields of mutual interest, open trade with no tariffs between member species, and most importantly, no central authority dictating how each species must organize their society. Each species maintains complete sovereignty over their own affairs. Zakara studied the display carefully, and his clawed fingers traced through the holographic text. This is radically different from the Council's approach. They demand conformity. You're offering diversity. We believe diversity is a strength, not a weakness, Lisa said. Earth itself has over 200 different governmental systems and cultural traditions. We've learned that cooperation doesn't require uniformity. The Theric commander was quiet for a long moment, and then he made a gesture that the translator identified as agreement. My people will need to discuss this among our clan leaders, but I believe you will find a favorable response. When can we expect formal negotiations to begin? We can begin immediately if you're willing, Lisa replied. I have a full diplomatic team aboard, and Ambassador Kyle Morrison himself is prepared to travel, here within the week, to finalize details. Over the next 3 months, Unity's Hope visited 6 more systems, and each visit brought new potential partners into the emerging coalition. In the Proxima sector, they encountered the Lumini and beings of pure energy, who existed as conscious patterns of light and electromagnetic radiation. The Council had rejected them on the grounds that non-corporeal species didn't qualify for membership under traditional definitions of sentient life. The Lumine representative manifested as a sphere of golden radiance that pulsed and shifted with their emotional states. Your Council fears what exists beyond their narrow understanding. One Lumine communicated through modulated light patterns. They cling to biological supremacy and cannot accept that consciousness takes many forms. Dr. Martin Cruz, who had joined the diplomatic mission as Earth's leading expert on artificial intelligence and non-traditional consciousness, smiled at the light being. We don't care what form consciousness takes. We care about building relationships with species who share our values of cooperation and mutual respect. The aquatic species called Neridians lived on the ocean world of Thalassa and had been rejected because the Council claimed oxygen. Breathing species had inherent advantages that made true equality impossible. Ambassador Kyron met with the human delegation in a specially designed underwater facility, and her bioluminescent patterns flickered with barely contained excitement as she reviewed the coalition proposal. For centuries, we have been told that our watery nature makes us lesser, Kyren said through the translation system. The Council's stations and ships are all designed for air breathers, with water environments treated as afterthoughts or special accommodations. Your proposal treats all member species as equals regardless of environmental needs. Lisa nodded firmly. Every coalition station will be designed with multiple environmental zones from the beginning. Water environments and oxygen environments and vacuum environments for species that prefer neither. True equality means building systems that work for everyone, not forcing everyone to adapt to a single standard. The Artificial Intelligence Collective, known as the Cognition Matrix had been denied council membership on the HFY principle that synthetic life didn't qualify as true sentient beings, despite overwhelming evidence of consciousness and self-awareness. Martin Cruz spent 3 days in deep discussion with the Matrix's representatives and came away more convinced than ever that consciousness was consciousness regardless of its origin. The Matrix communicated through a symphony of lights and mathematical patterns that formed words in the air. Your council fears us because we think differently and process information in ways they cannot comprehend. They cannot control us through biological needs or emotional manipulation, so they deny our existence as valid life. Martin leaned forward and spoke with passionate conviction. Earth recognizes the cognition matrix as fully sentient beings deserving of all rights and respect. We offer not just membership but true partnership. Your computational abilities combined with biological species perspectives will make our coalition stronger. By the end of the first year, the Independent Systems Coalition had grown to 12 member species. Earth established Coalition Station Alpha in neutral space between star systems and far from any council jurisdiction. The massive orbital platform served as headquarters and trade hub and cultural exchange center all at once. Ships from a dozen different worlds docked at its ports, and beings of wildly different forms walked or floated or rolled through its corridors. Ambassador Kyle Morrison, now serving as Earth's primary coalition representative, stood in the main observation deck watching the constant flow of traffic around the station. Beside him, Commander Jakara had become a regular presence, and the two had developed a genuine friendship over the months of negotiations and planning. The Council will not be pleased with this development, Jakara observed as a Luminite transport vessel drifted past the window. Kyle smiled slightly. No, I imagine they won't be pleased at all. Good, Jakara said with his characteristic rasping laugh. Let them see that their rejection only made us stronger. Let them see that there are species in this galaxy who refuse to be diminished by their narrow standards. More ships arrived daily, and more species sent diplomatic missions to explore the possibility of membership. The coalition was growing faster than anyone had anticipated, and with each new member the balance of galactic power shifted just a little bit more. The Council had meant to keep humanity in its place, but instead they had sparked something they never expected. They had created competition, and in doing so they had forced change upon the galaxy, whether they were ready for it or not. Lisa Monroe walked through the station's commercial district and marveled at the mixing of cultures. A Theric merchant haggled with a human trader over the price of rare minerals. Neridian children watched in fascination as a Lumine performer created intricate light displays. Cognition Matrix avatars debated philosophy with organic scholars in a corner cafe. This was what the Council feared, Kyle had told her. Not violence or conquest, but genuine cooperation between different forms of life. They feared losing control and losing relevance. Sophie Blake from Earth's Intelligence Division approached Kyle in the observation deck with a datapad in hand. Ambassador, we've been monitoring communications across neutral space. 3 more species have withdrawn their applications to the Council. They're requesting information about joining the coalition instead. Kyle took the pad and scanned the names. All 3 were species that had been in the Council's application process for years, with no decision forthcoming. How many does that make in total? 19 confirmed members, Sophie replied. 8 more in active negotiations. The projections suggest we could reach 30 members within 2 years. The Council spent centuries building their monopoly on interstellar cooperation, Jakara observed. You've created a viable alternative in less than 1 Earth year. That is remarkable. Kyle looked out at Coalition Station Alpha and felt a surge of pride. We didn't do this alone. Every species here contributed. Every species here chose to stand together, rather than beg for acceptance from those who would diminish them. This is what happens when you give people an alternative, when you offer respect instead of judgment, when you build something based on what we can achieve together instead of arbitrary rules about what we should be. The coalition was still young and still growing and still finding its way, but it was real and it was strong. And it was proof that the galaxy had room for more than one vision of the future. The summons arrived via encrypted quantum transmission, and Kyle Morrison read it 3 times before he could fully process what it said. The message was brief and formal, and carried the official seal of the Galactic Council. They were requesting a formal meeting regarding the Independent Systems Coalition, and they were calling it an urgent matter of galactic security. Kyle stood in the Coalition Command Center on Station Alpha and looked at the assembled representatives from the member species. The circular chamber had been designed to give every species equal prominence, and there were no elevated positions or seats of honor. Everyone sat or stood or floated at the same level. "The Council wants to meet with us," Kyle announced and held up the data pad. "They claim our coalition is a matter of galactic security." Lieutenant Commander Sophie Blake from Earth's Intelligence Division pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the room with streams of intercepted data. "We've been monitoring Council communications for the past 3 months, and the traffic has increased dramatically. They're worried and they're scared. 3 more species have withdrawn their membership applications to join us instead, and that makes them nervous." The Lumini representative manifested as a sphere of golden light and pulsed with what Kyle had learned to recognize as satisfaction. The Council enjoyed their monopoly on interstellar cooperation for centuries. We have disrupted their exclusive arrangement, and they do not know how to respond. Neridian Ambassador Kyren floated in her water-filled chamber, and her bioluminescent patterns flickered with agitation. "They are calling us rogue states in their propaganda networks. Their news services claim we are militarizing and preparing for aggressive expansion. They paint us as threats to galactic peace." Kyle frowned and crossed his arms. "Are we militarizing?" He looked directly at General Claire Hudson, who attended the meeting via hologram from Earth. Claire shook her head firmly. "We are building defensive capabilities, and there is a significant difference. The Coalition Security Initiative is exactly what we named it. Security, not conquest. Every member species contributes ships and resources according to their capabilities. Every member has veto power over any military action. We have established defense stations in our own territories, and we patrol our own trade routes. We threaten no one." "The Council sees any organized military outside their control as a threat," Sophie interjected. "Especially one that is growing as quickly as ours. We are up to 19 member species now, with 8 more in active negotiations. Our combined fleet numbers over 3,000 vessels, and our economic output rivals the Council's established members." "Commander." Chakara stood from his seat, and his bronze scales gleamed under the station's lights. "Perhaps we should attend this meeting. We can demonstrate that we are not the aggressors they claim we are. We can show them that cooperation need not flow through their channels alone." The Cognition Matrix, representative in an android avatar, designed for diplomatic interactions, tilted its head thoughtfully. "Agreed, we should go as equals and not as supplicants requesting permission. We are not asking for anything from them. We are simply existing alongside them." Kyle nodded slowly and felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "Then we will attend. I will lead a delegation of 5 representatives and 1 from each of our founding member species. We will make it clear that the Coalition is not a threat, but we will also make it clear that we will not dissolve simply because they demand it." The meeting took place 2 weeks later on Concordia Station and the Council's primary diplomatic facility orbiting a neutral star system. Kyle led the Coalition delegation through corridors designed to impress and intimidate. The walls were adorned with holographic displays, showing the Council's thousands of years of history. The ceilings soared high overhead and made every visitor feel small and insignificant. The Council chamber itself was a masterpiece of psychological architecture. The chamber was vast and echoing, and the Council members sat on elevated platforms that forced visitors to look up at them. The lighting was arranged to cast the Council in bright illumination, while leaving the floor below in relative shadow. Kyle refused to be intimidated. He walked to the center of the chamber with his head held high, and his Coalition colleagues arranged themselves beside him in a show of unity. Counselor Vexithara spoke first, and her crystalline form refracted the chamber lights into rainbow patterns. "The Galactic Council recognizes the Independent Systems Coalition. We call this meeting to address serious concerns about your rapid military expansion and your disruptive influence on galactic stability." Expansion. Kyle kept his voice level and professional. "We have established mutual defense agreements among sovereign species. Nothing more." Another Council member spoke, and this one resembled an upright insectoid with compound eyes that gleamed in the light. "You have constructed 47 military installations in the past year alone. Your combined fleet numbers exceed 3,000 vessels. Your territories now encompass over 50 star systems. This represents a significant military force that operates outside council oversight. Chikara stepped forward, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber. Defensive installations in our own territories. Vessels for protecting our trade routes and our borders. We have not entered council space. We have not threatened council members. We have not initiated any acts of aggression. Bexithara's crystalline body pulsed with amber light. Your very existence threatens galactic stability. There has been one council for over 5,000 years. One system of law. One framework for peaceful coexistence among the species of this galaxy. Your organization undermines that unity. Kyle felt his anger rising but kept it tightly controlled. With respect, Counselor, that is precisely the problem. One system that rejected species for being different. One framework that worked for some but not for all. One set of standards that forced conformity, rather than celebrating diversity. We are not trying to replace the Council. We are not trying to overthrow your authority. We are simply offering an alternative for those species who do not fit your requirements. You offer chaos, Vexthara said coldly. You offer a competing power structure that will inevitably lead to conflict. History shows that when two great powers exist in the same space, they eventually go to war. The Lumini representative spoke, and their voice came through as melodious tones that filled the chamber. You have authority over your members, Counselor. You do not have authority over sovereign species who choose a different path. We are not your subjects. We are not your children to be disciplined. We are independent civilizations who have chosen to work together in a manner that respects our individual natures. The Council demands that the Coalition dissolve, another Council member said. This was a being that appeared to be made of living crystal similar to Vexithara, but with a darker coloration. You will dismantle your military installations. You will cease recruitment of new members. You will acknowledge Council authority as supreme in all matters of galactic governance. Kyle felt Chikara tense beside him, and knew the Theric commander was struggling to contain his anger. Kyle spoke before his colleague could say something that might escalate the situation. The Coalition respectfully declines. We are sovereign species exercising our right to free association. We threaten no one. We simply exist outside your jurisdiction. Then you choose to be enemies of galactic peace, Vexithara declared. No, Kyle replied firmly. We choose to be friends to all who respect our sovereignty. We choose to be partners with those who value cooperation over conformity. And we choose to defend ourselves if necessary, but we will never be the aggressors. The meeting continued for 6 more hours and went in circles without resolution. The Council demanded dissolution. The Coalition refused. The Council threatened sanctions. The Coalition pointed out that they had trading partners who were not Council members and would weather any economic pressure. The Council implied military action. The Coalition made it clear they would defend themselves. As Kyle's shuttle departed Concordia Station, he felt exhausted and frustrated. Sophie contacted him on a secure channel, and her face appeared on the small screen beside his seat. Our intelligence picked up something during the meeting, Ambassador. The Council has already authorized the first phase of sanctions against Coalition members. They are pressuring neutral species to cut trade with us. They are spreading propaganda about our alleged aggression, and there are encrypted military communications that suggest they may be preparing for more direct action. Kyle closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. So it begins. Economic warfare first, yes, Sophie continued. But our analysts believe if the sanctions do not work and if we continue to grow, then the Council may resort to more aggressive measures. They see us as an existential threat to their authority. Prepare contingencies, Kyle said quietly. All of them. Defensive protocols and EME. Emergency evacuation plans and worst-case scenarios. I want every Coalition member to know exactly what to do if this turns into open conflict. Understood, Ambassador. Sophie replied. Kyle looked out the shuttle window at the stars streaming past and wondered if humanity had made a terrible mistake. They had built something good and something valuable in the Coalition, but they had also created an enemy. The Council would not simply accept a rival power, and both sides were now locked in a confrontation that could only end in accommodation or war. He thought about Helen Grant's words from that day in her office after the rejection. The Council made their choice. Now we make ours. They had chosen to build their own path, and now they would have to see it through regardless of the cost. The galaxy was changing, and change always came with risk. Kyle just hoped they were strong enough to survive what was coming. The attack came without warning on a cold morning in the Gamma sector. 3 Coalition trading vessels had been traveling through neutral space, carrying medical supplies and technological components, when they were intercepted by what appeared to be pirates. The ships never had a chance to defend themselves, and the wreckage was discovered 6 hours later by a Theric patrol vessel. Captain Lisa Monroe stood in the Coalition Command Center staring at the holographic display that showed the debris field. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides and her jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. The wreckage told a story that made her blood run cold. These were not pirates, General Claire Hudson said as she examined the tactical data. The weapon signatures match Council military technology, plasma cannons of Vextheron design, targeting systems that use Council encryption protocols. Someone gave advanced military hardware to criminals and pointed them directly at our ships. Ambassador Kyle Morrison stood beside them, and his face was pale. How many casualties? 43 souls, Claire replied quietly. 15 humans and 12 Theric and 9 Neridians and 7 Lumini, all civilians. All unarmed merchant crew. President Helen Grant appeared via hologram and her expression was grim. This is the 4th attack in the past month. We have confirmation of 6 attacks total now, all targeting Coalition vessels in neutral space, all using Council technology. They are using proxies, Sophie Blake said as she pulled up additional intelligence data. They give weapons and targeting information to criminal elements and then claim plausible deniability. They can say they had nothing to do with it while our people die. Commander Jakara slammed his clawed hand on the table, and the sound echoed through the command center. We cannot allow them to murder our people with impunity. The Theric demand action. We demand justice for those who were killed. Chiron's bioluminescent patterns flashed with angry reds and oranges in her water chamber. Agreed. But what action do we take? If we retaliate against the Council directly, we become the aggressors they claim we are. We give them justification for open war. The Cognition Matrix avatar raised one hand in a gesture requesting attention. We have located the source of the proxy forces, a Council black site facility in the Omega Nebula. It is where they are arming and coordinating the attacks. Our intelligence networks have tracked weapon shipments and encrypted communications back to this location. Kyle looked at the coordinates that appeared on the display. The facility was hidden deep within the nebula's interference fields and far from any official Council territory. Show me everything we have on this facility. Sophie manipulated the controls and detailed scans appeared. It is officially listed as a research station studying nebular phenomena. In reality, it is a covert operations base. They store weapons there and train operatives and coordinate activities that the Council does not want officially acknowledged. If we hit that facility, we are hitting the Council directly, Kyle said slowly. Even if it is not an official installation. Lisa stepped forward and her voice was steady. Are we, though? This facility is off the books. It is hidden in nebula interference. If we destroy it, the Council cannot even acknowledge it existed without admitting they were behind the attacks. They would have to either stay silent or admit to coordinating murders of civilian vessels. Helen leaned forward in her holographic projection. It is a message. We know what you are doing and we will not tolerate it, but it gives them an exit strategy. They can stop the attacks and save face by simply never mentioning this incident again. Or they could see it as an act of war, Claire warned. We need to be prepared for either outcome. They already made that choice when they started killing our people, Jakara said with controlled fury. We are simply responding to aggression they initiated. Kyle looked around at the assembled leaders and representatives. Every face showed anger and determination and grief for the lost civilians. We need to vote on this. It is too important a decision for anyone person to make. The vote was unanimous and every coalition member species agreed that action must be taken. 48 hours. Later, a coalition strike force materialized from faster-than-light travel near the Omega Nebula. Lisa commanded the operation from the bridge of the CSV Unity and the coalition's first jointly built capital ship. The vessel was a testament to cooperation with Theric, engineering and human weapons systems and cognition matrix, computational networks all working together. All vessels in position. Greg Owens reported from the tactical station. He had been promoted to executive officer and had become Lisa's most trusted subordinate. The facility's shields are active, but they are not charging weapons. They were not expecting us. Lisa took a deep breath and opened a channel on all frequencies. This is Admiral Lisa Monroe of the Independent Systems Coalition. The facility in this sector has been identified as the source of hostile actions against Coalition civilian vessels. You have 5 minutes to evacuate all personnel before we reduce it to debris. This is your only warning. For 3 long minutes nothing happened and the Coalition fleet held position with weapons locked on target. Then small escape pods began launching from the facility in clusters of 3 and 4 at a time. They are abandoning station, Greg reported. All personnel appear to be evacuating. Lisa watched the countdown timer on her display. At exactly 5 minutes she gave the order without hesitation. All ships open fire. The combined firepower of 12 Coalition vessels struck the facility simultaneously. Plasma cannons and missile batteries and energy weapons all converged on a single point. The facility's shields held for perhaps 3 seconds before collapsing under the overwhelming assault. The station itself lasted another 14 seconds before its reactor containment failed, and it exploded in a brilliant flash of light. All ships jumped to faster-than-light travel, Lisa ordered. Execute escape pattern Delta and rendezvous at the coordinates provided. Move now. The Coalition fleet vanished into faster-than-light speeds before any Council response vessels could arrive. The aftermath was tense and silent and dangerous. For 3 weeks, both sides waited for the other to make the next move. The Council issued no formal complaint about the destroyed facility. They made no public statements about the incident. They did not even acknowledge that anything had happened in the Omega Nebula. More importantly, the attacks on Coalition vessels stopped completely. It is a Cold War now, Sophie reported to Kyle during a security briefing. Both sides are armed and both sides are watching each other carefully. Neither side is willing to start open conflict, but neither side is backing down either. How long can we maintain this balance, Kyle asked. As long as we have to, Helen replied from Earth. We did not start this, but we demonstrated we will defend ourselves. The Council knows now that we are not helpless targets. But Kyle noticed something else in the intelligence reports that gave him hope. 4 new species had applied for Coalition membership in the past month. 2 current Council members had quietly approached Coalition diplomats through back channels to discuss hypothetical scenarios about switching sides. They are watching us stand up to the Council, Kyle realized. They are watching us refuse to be bullied or intimidated. And they are impressed, more than impressed, Jakara said with satisfaction. They are inspired. For thousands of years the Council was the only option. Now they see an alternative that will defend itself. An alternative that treats its members as equals. An alternative that does not demand conformity. Lisa looked at the tactical display showing Coalition territory and felt a mixture of pride and concern. We are growing stronger, but that makes us a bigger threat in the Council's eyes. They will not forget what we did in the Omega Nebula, Good Claire said firmly. Let them remember. Let them remember that we are not weak. Let them remember that killing our people has consequences. Let them remember that the Coalition will defend itself. The Cold War continued with both sides building up forces, and both sides engaging in covert operations. But no more civilian vessels were attacked. The proxy forces disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. The Council had tested the Coalition's resolve and found it stronger than expected. Kyle stood in his office late at night, looking at the star maps that covered his walls. The Coalition controlled more territory now than anyone had imagined possible 2 years ago. They had more members and more ships and more resources, but they also had an enemy that would never forget and never forgive this challenge to their Otho. Really, the galaxy was changing and the old order was crumbling. Whether that change would come peacefully or through fire and blood remained to be seen. Kyle just hoped they were ready for whatever came next, because the Cold War could not last forever and eventually someone would make a move that could not be taken back. 2 years had passed since the incident at the Omega Nebula, and Kyle Morrison stood in the Coalition Assembly Hall, watching the proceedings with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The hall had been expanded 3 times to accommodate the growing membership, and now it could hold representatives from 37 different species. Another dozen species maintained observer status and were actively considering full membership. Dr. Paul Martinez, who now served as Coalition Chief Science Officer, stood beside Kyle, watching the vote taking place on the main display. We have changed the balance of power in this galaxy. The Council still has more members, but barely. We control more resources and more advanced technology and more strategic territory than they do. A young intern from Earth approached them with a data pad and asked a question that had been on many minds lately. Sir, are we going to war with the Council? Kyle smiled gently and shook his head. No, something interesting has happened. The Council is changing. He pulled up a holographic newsfeed that showed Councillor Vexithera making an announcement from Concordia Station. Her crystalline form seemed less rigid than it had been 2 years ago, and her voice carried a different tone. The Galactic Council is implementing comprehensive reforms, Vexithara announced to the assembled council members. Membership criteria are being revised to allow for greater diversity in governmental structures. Military expenditure limits are being relaxed to acknowledge the right of self-defense. There will be greater tolerance for cultural and governmental diversity among member species. We recognize that our previous standards were too restrictive and may have excluded worthy civilizations. They are copying us, the intern observed with surprise. Paul shook his head. They are adapting. Competition forced them to evolve just as it forced us to become more organized and more unified and more strategic. We made each other better. Lisa Monroe, who now commanded all coalition defense forces, watched from the observation deck as ships from dozens of worlds conducted joint military exercises in nearby space. Commander Jakara stood beside her wearing a coalition military uniform, instead of his traditional Theric clan leader robes. His bronze scales gleamed under the station lights. My people have a saying, Jakara said quietly. The tree that stands alone breaks in the storm. The forest bends and survives. We are not alone anymore, Lisa agreed. We built something that none of us could have built separately. A priority transmission alert interrupted their conversation. Admiral, we are receiving a communication from the Galactic Council. They are requesting formal diplomatic talks regarding mutual cooperation protocols. Lisa and Jakara exchanged surprised glances. Not membership negotiations, Lisa asked carefully. No, Admiral. Cooperation as equals. They want to discuss having 2 separate organizations working together on common concerns like piracy suppression and natural disaster response, and first contact protocols with newly discovered species. Lisa felt a smile spreading across her face. Patch it through to Ambassador Morrison immediately. I think he will want to handle this one personally. In the diplomatic wing, Kyle received the transmission with careful optimism. The hologram showed not Vexithera, but a different counselor named Shenva, who had always been one of the more moderate voices in the council chambers. Ambassador Morrison, I am Counselor Shenva. The council wishes to propose a framework for cooperation between our 2 organizations. Kyle kept his expression neutral and professional. I am listening, Counselor. We recognize that the coalition represents legitimate interests of species that do not fit traditional council membership criteria, Shenva said. We also recognize that some of our policies were unnecessarily restrictive and excluded worthy civilizations for arbitrary reasons. We propose a mutual recognition agreement. 2 separate but equal organizations that cooperate on shared concerns while maintaining independent sovereignty. The Council would formally recognize the coalition as equals, Kyle said carefully. Not as rebels or rogue states, but as a legitimate alternative. Yes, Shenva replied. No more sanctions. No more proxy conflicts. No more attempts to undermine your organization. Instead, we propose joint task forces for mutual concerns like combating piracy, technology exchange programs for scientific advancement, formal borders that both organizations respect, and regular diplomatic contact to prevent misunderstandings. This is a significant shift in the Council's position, Kyle observed. Shenva's facial tendrils rippled in what Kyle had learned was their species equivalent of a rueful smile. Competition is a powerful teacher, Ambassador. You forced us to examine our assumptions and our prejudices. Some of them were deeply flawed. We saw diversity as weakness when it is actually strength. We saw rapid change as dangerous when it is actually innovation. We saw military preparedness as aggression when it is actually prudence. Over the next 6 months, the Coalition and Council negotiated what became known as the Treaty of 2 Stars. It established formal diplomatic relations between the 2 organizations. It created joint committees for shared concerns like scientific research and emergency response. It defined territorial boundaries that both sides agreed to respect. Most importantly, it ensured that neither organization could claim authority over the other. The signing ceremony took place simultaneously on Concordia Station and Coalition Station Alpha, with holographic links connecting the 2 locations. Kyle found himself standing next to Counselor Vexithera in a moment he had never imagined possible. "You were right," Vexithera said quietly. "That day in the council chamber when you said we did not have authority over sovereign species who choose a different path. We let our pride and our fear make us rigid. We almost made ourselves irrelevant. You adapted," Kyle replied. "That takes courage too. Earth taught us something important," Vexithera continued. "When we rejected you, humanity did not spend 50 years trying to become what we wanted. You built something new, something that worked for who you actually are, and you made it work so well that we had no choice but to pay attention. And in paying attention you grew," Kyle said. "Both our organizations are stronger now than either would have been alone." President Helen Grant attended the ceremony in person and stood at the podium to deliver the keynote address. She looked out at the assembled representatives from both the Council and the Coalition and spoke with quiet conviction. 3 years ago, the Galactic Council told us we were not ready to join the galactic community. They were correct, but not for the reasons they thought. We were not ready to join someone else's structure. We needed to build our own. And in doing so, we proved that this galaxy is large enough for multiple visions of cooperation and peace. She paused and looked directly at the Council delegation. "You banned Earth from the Galactic Council, so we built our own, and now we stand here as equals. Both organizations are better for having competition. Both organizations are stronger for having a counterbalance. Competition breeds excellence. Diversity breeds innovation. This treaty represents not the victory of one side over another, but the recognition that there are many paths to the same goal." The ceremony concluded with representatives from both organizations mingling freely. Kyle noticed Jakara deep in conversation with a council military commander comparing tactical doctrines. Lisa Monroe was explaining coalition shipbuilding techniques to curious council engineers. The Lumini representatives were demonstrating their unique form of art to fascinated council cultural officers. Sophie Blake approached Kyle with updated statistics. Galactic trade volumes are up 40% since the treaty announcement. Scientific collaboration proposals are flooding both organizations. 12 species that were not aligned with either side have now applied for observer status in both organizations. Kyle smiled at the data. When everyone does better, everyone benefits. From Earth. Paul Martinez sent his final report analyzing the treaty's long-term implications. The Coalition forced the Council to evolve. The Council forced the Coalition to organize and professionalize. Both organizations are now more dynamic and more inclusive and more effective than either would have been alone. Humanity's legacy will not be conquest or domination. It will be that we refused to accept arbitrary limitations and we showed others how to do the same. 5 years after being rejected. From the Galactic Council, Kyle stood on the observation deck of Coalition Station Alpha, which had been expanded to 3 times its original size. Ships from both Coalition and Council worlds moved freely through, space trading and exploring and cooperating on joint missions. Jakara joined him as had become their custom on the anniversary of the Coalition's founding. Do you think they regret it, rejecting Earth that day? Kyle considered the question carefully. Maybe. But if they had not rejected us, none of this would exist. The Coalition would not exist. The reforms would not have happened. The galaxy would still be operating under a single rigid system that excluded too many worthy species. Humanity has a talent for turning obstacles into opportunities, Jakara observed. We are stubborn that way, Kyle agreed with a slight smile.